Welcome to Narrow Line of Acceptance, where we discuss the limits of social media and its inclusion and acceptance of all people, regardless of their race, ethnicity, body type, sexual orientation, or gender. In each episode, we'll call attention to flaws in our favorite social media platforms and the individuals who use them. It's our goal to establish that there's no right way to exist and that we should never be policing someone else's body.
I'm Sophie.
I'm Nicole.
I'm Liani.
And I'm Megan. And today we'll be talking about our motivations behind why we wanted to have these conversations and synthesizing our individual projects to reach a broader conclusion.
Our thesis is that social media has the potential to display and empower a lot of marginalized groups and their voices, but it doesn't always meet this potential because it enforces a singular narrative about these groups. If one narrative is promoted and legitimized, then others internalize the idea that they're not acceptable and feel excluded from the group. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my project. In terms of my research, I looked at trans YouTubers who are actually making videos about topics that are pertinent to trans youth to provide them with guidance and support. And I sort of saw this pattern of how, like we said in our thesis, a lot of dominant narratives are sort of promoted that are not necessarily relatable to old trans people and might make them feel excluded or question their identities. And as a platform, YouTube does have the potential to really work as a means of activism and education because it's so accessible, but often fails at this because of the fact that it's enforcing these very specific sort of limited narratives. And it's not being realized because of that reason. So I guess I'm wondering, sort of in the context of everyone's projects, if maybe any of you guys have any thoughts about how your projects might kind of like relate to that or similar parallels between our projects.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of parallels between all of our projects, really, since they're all kind of looking at social media and how social media is influencing not only the people that they're representing, but the perspectives of others who are then looking at this representation, kind of forming an opinion based off of it. So to talk a bit more about my own project, I was looking at spectatorship of young Black girls on Instagram. So I definitely agree with your point about how YouTube does have the potential to be a platform that's very representative of so many different types of people. And I agree, Instagram is kind of the same way. It does have that potential. But I think with Instagram itself, there's a lot of pressure because of beauty standards that I think are created kind of from historic basis of Eurocentric beauty being the standard and being mainstream and kind of what's viewed as acceptable. So I definitely feel like Instagram kind of takes that historic basis and builds upon it, which is definitely not something that is good to see, since we do think that social media it gives kind of everyone a platform. And in this way, since it's just reinforcing this Eurocentric beauty, which consists of having like long light-colored hair and like smaller facial features, it's rejecting other types of beauty. So again, just to bring it back to young Black girls on Instagram, they probably don't fit into this mold of having longer hair. Their hair is usually curlier or kinkier, and it's just, they don't fit into this standard that's presented. So I definitely think that Instagram itself, again, has that potential to make a good impact, but it fails to do so because of the beauty standards it's prioritizing.
Yeah, I definitely agree, Nicole. When looking at Instagram, because I looked at Instagram in my research, I think something that's interesting about it is that it is image-based. So I think something about like the visual representation, not a lot of audio a lot of the times. There's little captions, but there's definitely like such a focus on like beauty representation and visual representation, and something that has to do with like who is visually being excluded, and that then going on to talk about what Sophie was talking about, which is like whose stories are being told, and which ones are seen as acceptable and normal, whatever that may be. And so my research looked at actual like a movement, and it was the body positivity movement that was trying to push back on this. So actually using social media for its potential to push back on these standards, but also seeing how even this movement within Instagram that has historically a bad rep for representation, how it even like had some faults in just still promoting the standard that was already there, and then also looked at the I Weigh campaign, which was started by a South Asian woman of color. So that was a different campaign, just because it already put at the forefront women of color and just people who didn't fit a standard, and how it used social media's potential in a different way, in a way to not just go along with this false sense of diversity promoted and democracy promoted in social media, but to actually critique it and to see it as a mode to really improve and really tell the stories, tell the passions, show the identities of many people. So I definitely think it connects to both of your research in that way.
Yeah, I think my research definitely connects back too, because I kind of looked at two different movements, and both of them were attempting to kind of push back, like you were saying, Leonie, against the typical like standard of one like singular story that kind of gets promoted. And it was interesting because one of the movements was kind of more successful in doing that than the other. And I think the defining factor was a little bit of what you were saying, Nicole, in that like there's kind of this outside group that is coming in and like giving their opinion, and then that kind of becomes like the one like story that is being told. And for one of the movements, they were able to be successful in like keeping their narrative as like what was promoted on social media, but the other movement kind of like the prevailing story was from the outsiders saying that like these like the specific group was intersex athletes, and saying that these intersex athletes were a threat to them. And once that kind of like singular story and singular narrative about the intersex athletes kind of took hold, there wasn't really any room for social media to kind of like help empower, you know, that marginalized group. So it definitely is kind of like a hit or miss kind of game.
So I know that all of us kind of have looked at different groups of people and examined how these different platforms have benefited or maybe not benefited them and the representation to other people. So if we had just one takeaway from all of our research on social media, like, do we think it's a good way of representing others? And if we don't, what do you guys think that we could do to make sure that it becomes more representative of these people, these groups?
I think that's a great question. I think my takeaway personally is that social media can be used for so many things, and for advocacy and for challenging norms, but it can't just be like the blanket statement that social media like promotes multiple stories. There actually has to be active involvement and active like showing of those stories. I don't think it can just be taken like for its potential and its nature. There actually has to be action behind that, in making sure that people know that there are multiple stories. And whether that means having, you know, people on your social media feed that are from all different backgrounds, or it means having campaigns that promote other influencers and other people that have different passions, I feel like then social media can be used. But I don't think it's just used when it's like a whole bunch of people are using it. I think then it becomes just like another place where we can perpetuate like society in general, just on an online form.
Yeah, I really like that idea, Leonie, of like actively making social media be its best self. I think that like with my research, it definitely was like kind of on like the leaders of the movement to actively like think tactically about how they were going to utilize social media in the way that was going to benefit them the most. And there's definitely like movements that do that successfully and movements that don't do that as successfully. And like with just like the way that social justice movements are, like with such high stakes that they have, like the kind of like importance of just getting it right the first time and not getting trapped in that place of social media just being a place for people to act on their own, and then it becomes kind of just like a mess instead of like an actual focused movement, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting as well, sort of jumping on this question of how we can improve social media. I think that what I had noticed talking about YouTube and what I think is universal in social media and why it has so much potential is just its accessibility. Like anyone with like a camera and an internet connection can post to YouTube, for example, or anyone with an internet connection can like tweet something. But I think also something that at least I saw, and I think that probably you guys also saw, was that some people, because of their celebrity status or because of their privilege of, being able to devote a lot of time and attention to creating content or to kind of being like very online, they're just more able to have the time to create content and become more popular and just kind of become the dominant voices of like a movement. And so I think that I guess I don't really have a solution for that entirely, but I do think that maybe making it more possible and accessible for people who don't have all these resources and all the time and equipment and sort of ability to speak out in this way, kind of trying to support people who are just like that and don't necessarily have all those privileges and resources, so that like more narratives are promoted that are more diverse, and then viewers can basically just not have to see like only a few narratives and can just see more like diverse stories.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with all of you guys. You guys made so many great points. But just to, again, jump on what Sophie was saying, it's so true that it is accessible to so many people, but it's much easier for some people to make content that I guess has more success because of those reasonings. Social media has kind of become like a job for some people now, and I think because of that, it's become more of an investment. So in order to succeed and like have your content become popular, you have to be creating content to a certain caliber, which I think is not what it was originally meant to do. So tying everything together, we kind of started a certain way, and now it's up to us to kind of backtrack a little bit and try and see if we can fix it. I hope we can. I'll try and be positive about that.
Yes, let social media be its best self. I love, Megan, that you said that.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Narrow Line of Acceptance. Be on the lookout for 2 more episodes where we'll do an in-depth look at Instagram beauty standards and trans and intersex identity in the context of social media. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye, everyone.